welcome to Mindful Notions, where we help young professionals do more with less. I am, as always, your host, Sam Lee. Today, we have a special episode because we're going to be talking about a specific article. And this was the latest article that Atlas, a Substack, published. Atlas is, and I'm quoting here, founded on the conclusion that old solutions are no longer working. Embracing AI and platforming the next generation of thought, Atlas's mission is to challenge the incumbent and advocate for the next systems that will hold up the world. This piece is called You Too Can Change the World, reframing our relationship with AI and the social forces that shape its diffusion. So what does that all mean? In the next 30 to 45 minutes, we're going to have a discussion about first, that piece at large, and then second, what that specifically means for young professionals at a time when it feels like disruption is the norm for how we get jobs and succeed career-wise and probably personally as well. So I'm extremely excited for this conversation to have both the author of this piece and the founder of Atlas, both repeat guests on different podcasts that I currently host, but welcoming them back, Hillary and then Austin. Welcome to Mindful Notions. Hillary, do you want to give a quick introduction? And then Austin, you can follow.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, I'm Hillary. Thank you so much for having me, Sam. So just to introduce myself a little bit, I am a writer on Scaffold. I founded Scaffold, and the idea behind that was essentially just having a platform to really write about my perspective on AI. And specifically, this perspective is one that I see as being very much born out of my experience working at the Writing Center. So it's specifically applying what I'll call a Writing Center lens to AI, which effectively places at its center these concepts of empowerment, discourse, learning, and creativity. Um, so that's my platform. And outside of that, I work a day job in corporate. But this has really been a passion project for me, something I really believe in. And it's been a really refreshing type of work to do that I feel is where I feel I can actually make an impact on the people around me. So, yeah, thanks
So,
for having me, Sam.
of course, anytime. Austin?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I can do better than the intro you gave me, but I'll try. So essentially, Atlas was founded for two reasons, and I'll say the first because it makes me sound smarter first. Essentially, when I have my own foreign policy Substack, and as I write, I tend to focus more on giving, new perspectives, trying to new policy orientations, new thoughts. And a lot of that was because, I don't really have the deep backgrounds that other people had, but I have this, creative thinking. And that's really what I want to leverage and, push with Atlas is seeing that, as you said, there are a lot of problems in the world that don't seem to be getting better. And I think really we need new solutions, innovative solutions to push past this. So really trying to platform people who don't have that institutional backing of a think tank, or something like that. The second reason is also to, push people I know to write more. And it's a funny story, but most of the people I have write for me, they all tend to say that, especially if they don't write for a job, that it's always a struggle for them. The process of thinking through it, of writing and revising it. They always compare it back to college or to school when they used to write. And so I found that this process is really good just to really help people define what they think, define what they believe, and go through that process. And you could even say critically think to tee up this piece.
Yes, a good segue in. And you can find both Scaffold and post links in the show description. And for Alice, if you want to write, feel free to reach out to Austin through Substack as well. For listener context, we're hosting this episode live. So I see that Austin's friend and Hillary's friend, Ben, has joined. So, Ben, thank you for being here. And whoever else is here as well, feel free to drop comments, questions, give us a like. As the past live streams have gone as well, silence is also interpreted as a like. So we appreciate the support. All right, let's get into this piece. You too can change the world. Hillary, why don't you give us a quick 30-second summary of what this piece covers?
Yeah. So long story short, I view this piece as really identifying the theory behind scaffold, which is effectively, as I've described it earlier, this writing center perspective, if you will, on AI. And I guess the goal of this piece is to really reframe the way we typically talk about AI as individuals, where I think so much of the conversation is typically focused on this question of efficiency, right? And this is kind of a side note, but I feel like that's a very much rooted in like a capitalist tendency in the way that AI has been diffused. And I guess the purpose of this piece was to really, first of all, recognize and acknowledge that AI is is a tool for empowerment for us as people, and to really reframe the conversation so that we can think about how to actually use AI for our own needs and, to change the world and to make an impact rather than just necessarily using it to sort of be better at the things that to sort of better power the systems that make the world go round.
Got it. And Austin, from your perspective as an editor, why publish this piece now in Atlas? Maybe it was just the next one available, but beyond that, why is this relevant for Atlas readers?
Right. No, I would like to think that I have a long queue of pieces
Of
going, but
course, of course.
um, I think the answer to that is, if not now, then when? Because, looking at AI, it definitely is compounded by today's news of, President Trump's AI framework. But
Yep.
we see AI developing at breakneck pace, only probably going to be going quicker from here on. And, people used to say and compare stuff to what was called Moore's Law, which is saying that, I think it was with semiconductors, every year it would double in efficiency, double in scale. Um, and, AI is even surpassing that. Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, said that soon AI will be able to compound 10 years of scientific progress into one. And so compare that and add on to addition to that I read recently that, there's several companies that are, forcing their employees to use AI. It's increasingly being used in private life. It's increasingly being used as Hillary references in the piece in school. And despite all this, we have not had these questions about, what really does AI do to us when we use it. Um, and when we do have questions, it's about safety. It's about data usage. It's along those lines, not really about what does it do to us as people. And so I think not only does this bring up that question, but it seeks to answer it when people aren't trying to answer it and really deal with this issue of if AI is going to be everywhere, what does that mean and how can we use it?
Hillary, you start off this piece with an anecdote about a New York Times article where doctors told this patient that he was going to die, and then through generative AI, basically using drug repurposing, identifying alternative use cases of drugs, this guy was able to survive and live. And you quickly contrast that with how probably younger people are using AI. And the example you give is that a high schooler who uses ChatGPT to do her homework because she's too lazy to do it herself. So I'm curious why you jumped to that, because when I think about young people, and maybe we can start with high schoolers using AI, I'm sure there are many cases that support that. But I'm also wondering about the high schoolers who use AI more critically, and maybe what you're advocating for, who maybe aren't using AI to cheat and just finish their homework for them, but using AI to grade practice tests before they take a math test. I'm curious if that thought had crossed your mind when you wrote the piece, or if you felt like this was the prevailing narrative of younger people, specifically high schoolers, using AI to maybe this see quality rather than something that would advance their thinking.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, and I think it's totally right to point out that it's almost it's like two extremes, right? It's one using AI for drug repurposing, and the other using it for like literally like it's something that's arguably like morally deplorable in some ways as well, right? Like you're
Sure.
effectively cheating in some ways, right? I think um the purpose of that analogy was very much not to argue that was a pervasive use of AI. Although I will say that there potentially are some parallels to how we use it in work life in the sense of like it's not viewed as poorly in that context because it's not there's the concept of academic integrity doesn't take the same form. But that aside, I think the purpose of um, that section, it was honestly more of an intuitive. reaction for me. Like, and I very much, I think later on the piece, and I explicitly note it as well, I sort of temper my reaction, but it's more so this, I had this like visceral reaction after reading that article where I was imagining the way that AI would work here, right? This idea of like drug repurposing, like going through all of the medical textbooks, if you will, like literally just like synthesizing all that information and like finding a solution that like out of so many different sources, like a human mind can't actually parse through, right? But AI can do it. And then and it results in a very transformative outcome, which is, you know, an alternative use for a drug that for a disease that most doctors may not be able to find a cure for, right? Or some sort of um, remedy for. And it's that process, right? This idea that, you know, you're going through all of these documents, right? And like also like the energy requirements associated with that. I feel like that was at the back of my head this whole time, which is like how many resources does it take to go through all of those documents to sort of synthesize to like identify that one thing that fits, right? And like when you talk about something like drug repurposing, right? Like it makes sense, right? It's like you're saving a life, right? You're changing the world in that sense. But in contrast to like high school, and again, not saying that that's a pervasive use case, right? But this idea of like those same processes, right? Those same like energy intensive processes of sifting through so much data, of like identifying like that perfect solution for something that is, you know, like it's just for you to do your homework, for you
Yeah.
to do one problem on today's homework. And then, you know, like it was very much a visceral reaction to just understanding that these two things are happening with the same type of technology. It's not that they're happening at the same frequency or anything like that, right? It's like
Right.
not a commentary on that, but it's the idea that these are two viable use cases that a meaningful amount of people sort of apply. And it just feels very incomparable in that sense.
Right. I mean, you even mentioned it, like just a paragraph later, you use this phrase, I felt irrational disdain for all those who
Yeah.
use generative AI tools for anything less than changing the world. And in case people don't know, Hillary did very well in school. So maybe she's calling from a specific perspective about using cheating as a maybe morally reprehensible action. But explain that phrase, irrational disdain, because I find that fascinating. And also, I want to get your take as well on um, people who might be using AI for what they perceive as just making their life easier, but might be hurting them long term in different ways, especially on the cognitive abilities. But Hillary, explain that phrase, irrational disdain.
Yeah, I think that phrase really like, captures like what I was trying to communicate earlier as well, which is the sense that that was like my visceral reaction, but some level knew that like there are a bunch of aspects involved. Like one, kind of as you mentioned, like where is that morality aspect coming from? Like people can do what they want with their lives, right? Like fine, you do your thing, but like it was just this sense of like yeah, it definitely comes from like a weird moral place where I was like, how could you do that? Like, how could you use a technology that's so energy intensive to do something that like you can slash you should do for yourself? And that phrase was kind of my attempt at acknowledging that. But I think that's also maybe where things come in because that's my morality, right? Like, that's what I believe
Yeah.
is right. And I also very much concede that that's not what everyone else believes. But I will say that the underlying sort of commentary, if you will, is about that environmental impact. And so that's my attempts at acknowledging that while also not being able to fully reconcile with it. Like, okay, like, so you use it to change the world in other instances. For instance, as you mentioned, like writing a really thought-provoking essay, right? Helping to
Yeah.
write a thought-provoking essay. Like, how exactly do you like parse through the energy implications of that? Like, that's also consequential as well, right? So
Right.
it's an acknowledgement of the more ambiguity there for sure, and some ambiguities in my own part.
Right. Austin, what are your feelings both on that concept of like how to view when people use the tools in ways you might not agree with? And then maybe I was curious, like when you're editing, did this phrase come up in that, or was it kind of just like good to go as written?
Right. Well, in terms of the phrase, I did really enjoy it because, you know, it does really get at that emotional aspect of it. Um, but going back to the original question you had asked, I think it's such a great question, mostly because I asked also actually asked that to her. And we had a
Mm.
little debate as I was editing it in terms of, I am someone who does use AI a lot. I'm someone that just recently I've started using Google AI Studio. It has a voice uh, voice function you can use to talk with it. So I've been using that
Yeah.
to practice different languages. Or there's something I publish on my Substack called Artificial History, which it takes an article and makes it into this digestible thing. So I use AI a lot, and there is this very moral thing to consider in terms of the energy usage, and I'm not sure where I stand there. It almost seems like an unfortunate reality with how much we are expected to use AI. I mean, just on our last time I was here talking with you, we talked about how every entry level career professional needs to be using AI, needs to learn how to use it, or else they're just not going to have the same, competitiveness.
Yeah.
And that's the side fact that to use it, you do need to use a lot of energy, water. I joked this other day, I was creating ChatGPT images for work. And I must have created like 30 of them. And I joked to my boss at the end of the day, I was like, I think I'd use like a small town's worth of energy just doing this thing that was going into a slide deck that probably would be looked over once and it wasn't that important. So in terms of the moral qualms and quandaries with energy usage, I don't really know what to say about that. That's probably beyond my expertise, and it's something that we really need to reckon with. And we've discussed this in terms of, is this something about just lowering energy, or is this lowering the tolerance you should have to using AI? But in terms of the question of that I was asking her in terms of how do you differentiate these two extremes, in terms of I also use AI. Am I using it in this way that's, like saving a life, which is almost something crazy to say, or something that as minimal as cheating on homework? And I asked her a lot of questions and we had a long discussion on this because it was something that I struggled to understand for a bit. And so we kind of got to this conclusion, which was how you see AI and how you use it. And the way I had implicitly understood it was seeing AI as a tool. And I think that's how a lot of people look at it, is seeing AI as a one-to-one, almost with a calculator. You
Yeah.
plug something in, it's just this technological innovation that why wouldn't you use it? Because it just makes stuff easier, it allows you to do so much more math, allows you to go beyond what is possible. The thing that we eventually got with in terms of discussing AI is that it, in some ways, can be used as a tool, but in other ways, it's not. And we're allowing that boundary to be crossed and blurred all the time without really considering it. And I think where that really comes to is whether you're using it as something that is basically like a tool where you give it the whole prompt you want. You have defined what it comes out as, what its inputs are, all of that already done for it in the prompt, then it almost is a one-to-one tool.
Yeah.
You're just asking for it to, as they did with the alternative use cases for drugs, to either siphon through this large database, or use it to change the format of names.
Right.
But
Right.
in the other cases, and what we're seeing, later on, she describes an IR assignment, IR essay, in terms of asking ChatGPT, what are using these three IR lens, how can you define World War II? In that instance, you're giving it no real definition, no real framework. And what that's doing in that instance is it's more than a tool. It's becoming, it's thinking for you. And I think that's what we really got to as this difference with AI, and the difference of those use cases was how you use AI, whether as something that elevates you as a tool or whether that's something that, replaces you. I think that's maybe something we'll get to later, but a
Right.
very interesting discussion for it.
Right. And the majority of the article is broken down into these three main pillars. First, perceiving, second, reclaiming, and then third, acting. I actually want to start in the second section, reclaiming, because I think you start that with a very core concept of what you define, Hill, as critical thinking. You write that critical thinking is the process by which we apply our perspectives to unfamiliar notions, thereby generating new insights that contribute to the global ecosystem of ideas. It is one way that each and every one of us bring something new into this world. So I know that you've been doing a lot of work and thinking about critical thinking. That's what a lot of scaffold is. But for somebody who does not think about it as much as you or even any of the three of us here, give like a simple example that somebody might be able to grasp when you are trying to convey this idea. Because I think critical thinking is such a buzzword that everybody thinks they know what it means, but maybe they don't, especially in this context. So what what's a simple example that comes to mind to explain how you view critical thinking?
Yeah, for sure. Um,
You stumped her.
you did stump me a little bit. I'm trying to think of it's funny because I think of it as so pervasive, but trying to think of something that is sort of easy to grasp.
Well, while you're thinking, like maybe let me just tee you up. When I
Mhm,
think about it so much with AI because it kind of goes hand in hand for me. Like every time I use chat or probably more so for me, Notion AI, constantly thinking about like, okay, like make sure you ignore the flattery, make sure you like set the
mhm.
prompt right, like try not to give typos, like don't be so lazy about it. And then when I get responses, I'm immediately suspicious where I'm just like, okay, like let me just
Yeah,
like even if I think it's right, let me just like gut check. Or even if it's like fixing typos in my sentences, like let me look at it myself. And that to me is like my critical thinking when I'm just like suspicious. Like I'm just a little suspicious of something
yeah,
that is supposed to be helping me, not because I don't want to trust it, but because I know it's not there yet, because I know that I
yeah.
should not trust it. So that's always how I view it.
Yeah, and I think, like, if I were to reframe it a little bit in the way kind of I described, right? That suspicion comes from the place of trusting your own intuition, right? And drawing upon your own perspective. It's this idea of applying like what you know, right? And what you, in this sense, like almost intuitively know to be true, right? Applying that to what is sort of given to you, right? Like the AI output, and then transforming that output in line, or transforming that output and interpreting that output in line with sort of your previous understanding, right? Another one, when I think of critical thinking, I think a common use case is um, in reading the news, right? For example, like if you're reading something about global affairs, right? Like we're all like SFS here, right? Like we bring in
School
certain
of Foreign Service for people who don't
school of
know.
foreign service, yeah. So like we're familiar with these topics, with the theories, with the issues, whatever they may be, right? So we bring that knowledge in with us when we're reading an article, let's say about, in the global affairs section of the New York Times, right? We see something, and one you could say it's skepticism, but I think generally what I view as critical thinking is just like seeing something, seeing that as a perspective, but then taking the extra step of not just passively reading that, but applying your own knowledge, right? What new concept can you transform onto it? It's not, I think I would push back a little bit against skepticism because it's not so much that you don't trust the authority of the article or the author of that article, but more so it's like you don't accept it as like that's all this body of information. You seek to transform that information and create new information, new insight from applying your own knowledge as well. So it's
Yeah.
fundamentally this idea of critical thinking, sorry, just to conclude, is rooted
No,
in
go
this
ahead.
idea of like new insights. And that's kind of part of what is like the root in this article as well.
Yeah, and I think that binds together like the first two sections where you talk about the end of the second section about how to reclaim our perspective in the age of AI. You say that when the AI responds to your prompt, don't take what it says as self evident, treat it as a perspective with the same level of suspicion that you may treat the overeager student in your recitation who should think before they speak just a tad more. I found the academic metaphors and similes in this one to be very funny. I appreciate the work you both did on that. I'm curious, Austin, as somebody who does use AI very frequently, has has your perspective on like how to best critically think changed at all since you started using AI more heavily, or do you feel like you're still just applying whatever principles you might have had during our college days and then just applying it to how to use AI now?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's something that continuously tackle with. I think it has been something that's developed quite a bit, um, especially because at the beginning of when I started using AI, I think I mentioned this last time, but I did not use AI pretty much at all during college. And I really started at work with a boss who really pushed me to use it, mostly just because it did stuff faster. And it did stuff better in a lot of ways. But I found myself slowly becoming dependent, becoming one of those people where when I tried to write something, I was like, oh, I can't do this anymore. It's hard
Yeah.
for me. And so that kind of pushed me to write more because it was this desire to regain this ability to write and in a way critically think. But it is in this interesting spot now where I've had this moment of realization. And I think it goes to what you were saying earlier and something that Hillary also picked up on in terms of, you critically think about it because you know it's not quite there yet. And so that brings this question into it of what happens when it does get there? What happens when it is something that, for all intents and purposes, is miraculous, is a PhD in every single field, is, it critically thinks for you. What happens to your thinking there? And I think the only way we can go about it, in my eyes at least, is to return to what Hillary was saying, is going back to this idea of using it critically, not in terms of doubting it per se, but in terms of knowing that you have a perspective yourself. And that regardless of how smart the AI can be and how much you maybe should use it at some parts, because it is easier, because it makes you capable of doing stuff you previously weren't able to do, to know that regardless of that, you can add on to it, or there is something special about you. Just as, maybe in the future where AI becomes a quote unquote person, maybe there's something special about it, you know.
Yeah, and if I could just, like, even follow up with that analogy, right? The sense of, like, if AI becomes as smart as, someone with a PhD, right? Like, to bring it back to, like, a school context, right? Because I feel like that's what's familiar to us. But you're talking with a professor, right? They have a PhD. Like, it it's tricky, right? Because I my perspective would be engage with that professor, right? Like engage in productive discourse with them. And I've been lucky where I've had relationships with professors that have encouraged me to do that. That have been like,
Yeah.
your opinion matters. Like, tell me what you think. I know that I have a PhD. I know that I have expertise in this area, right? But I'm still curious what you can bring to the table and I want to have a conversation about it. And it's exactly that perspective where it's like you see what in order to participate in a conversation like that, you have to see your professor as not just like the authoritative source, but as a perspective, as another perspective for you to engage with, for you to sort of collect, like to add value to. So I would just like tie that out a little bit.
And if I could
Yeah.
add on to that really quick, I think
Sure.
when I read this piece, my first reaction to her was, this is exactly what Alice is meant to be. It's meant to provides, or the idea of critically thinking and engaging with this is exactly that idea of trying to provide new perspectives, recognizing that new perspectives might not have the acclaim behind it, but is valuable in its own right, and perhaps even in a way more valuable because it is new. And as we see AI increasingly be trained on, either if you're in China, on prescribed data sets, or on specific data sets that are given to it, you're gonna see this one perspective come through, or that's at least what a lot of people are fearing. And so there is really benefit to not being part of that data set, or at least to having a perspective outside of it.
For sure. I just want to mention that I wrote a piece for Alice earlier. So Austin saying that this piece is what Alice is all about.
Huh.
I will be remembering that. I guess my piece didn't hit that bar, but
You
I'll,
just
I'll
have to one up
try.
it
I'll try
now.
next time. Yeah, I'll try next time. I want to pivot a little bit before getting into the last part of the piece, which is about acting. And that's where I think, Hill, you really lay out these nice solutions to hopefully lead into more of these pieces, because I will say it kind of leaves you wanting a bit more. But I think that one thing that we've brought up a few times now is the academic context. We all met during college, and college wasn't that long ago. But we're all young professionals now, and maybe you two will be going back to grad school. Maybe me too, but definitely much later. I'm very happy not being in school. But we're all young professionals. We're all somewhat on LinkedIn. We all have Substacks. We talk about young professional stuff a lot. And I I want to talk about this archetype that's emerging of this young professional that may or may not have graduated college, but is 10xing, 100xing their productivity. They're vibe coding the latest new app. They're telling everybody that they don't need a CFO anymore, COO, because they're AI agents. That I feel like has rapidly become most of my LinkedIn feeds, and I hate it. But I hate that I can't look away. That's more where I'm coming from because, of course, success needs to be recognized. But I'm curious what your piece home means for that demographic, because I think more and more as we see people our age or younger use AI in truly brilliant ways, but potentially stupid ways as well. And they're just kind of, I mean, like they're no smarter than, the rest of the failed startup founders, the generation before. Of course, some are going to make it. But I think what I'm trying to get at is, I think you asked all these questions about like, why would you use AI in a cheap way, or like who are you beholden to shareholder wise? But what about the people who like really view these tools as their way to success, and they're willing to like do whatever they can to use it as much as they can to get to that, whether that's money, fame, influence, you name it? What would you say to that demographic that I think is a sizable portion of our generation?
Mm. As in, like, using it with the ends of success in mind, kind of, right? Like, these conventionally defined notions of success.
Yeah, like I'm thinking from that perspective, right? Like I read something like you're using AI with the objective of exploitation. And as a young professional, I'd be a founder, I might roll my eyes at that. Or again, just like the shareholder point about like who are you beholden to? Do you think you're too good to like write that paragraph email? Some people do. So what would you say to somebody who's reading that who might be our age and similar in other ways as well?
I would argue those are slightly two different perspectives, I think. I'll start with maybe the first one, and you can remind me if I end up forgetting the second one. But this idea of like, let's say a hypothetical startup founder who is just using AI for a very specified sort of set of means, right? Well, I guess what I would say is like you are I would say you are exploiting the AI, right? If you are focused on just getting an output, you have a very specific thing in mind, and you're using AI for the sole purpose of getting that output and not, for example, using it to test the validity of your ideas, like pressure test your ideas, for example. I would say then that you're not looking to critically think with AI. You are exploiting it. And I'll say here that when I say that word, I actually don't mean it in any sort of value judgment sense, right? Like in terms of like my own like intuitive reactions aside, like genuinely, right? Like that's it is what it is, right? I think this maybe ties into the second example as well, where like someone's writing it to using it to write their emails, right? Fine. Like I'm not saying you can't do that, right? But it's more so like if you are interested in using it for yourself and specifically going beyond what you and your like using it to bring possibilities beyond sort of what's available to you without AI, right? Like for example, let's say the startup founder, maybe they have co-founders, right? So it's not like they're in a silo either. They're still talking to other people, right? But maybe AI, like in giving some sort of like average perspective, right, brings something different. Maybe like it's, bringing an idea that like college kids who represent a limited demographic, maybe that's an idea they wouldn't normally just think of because they don't actually engage with what the rest of the population may be like. So I would say if you sort of ignore that potential of AI, then you are kind of exploiting it in that sense. But again, not applying a value judgment onto that. Like it is what it is, and like that's the way we use a lot of our technology.
Right, right. And I think the way you end the piece is indicative of like that perspective bringing that both you and Austin have brought up. You mentioned that although it feels pompous to say, given the sheer amount of people, of experts who actually work in this field and can code, there should be a parentheses vibe in front of that at this point. I do think that I have a different perspective. And I really resonate with that because I don't think before I started heavily using Notion, which is a productivity tool for people who might not know, I don't feel like I got that. Like for me, technology enabled me to start developing my own thoughts outside of school or what I read on the news or my parents or my friends. It allowed me to put all of those sources into an area, and there wasn't Notion AI back then, but before and after start developing my own perspective. And now it is with Notion AI. But I will say, whatever current period we are in with the rapid AI development, there's definitely still a need for humans. Of course, as we all know, we're not there yet with what Austin mentioned about AI just being able to critically think across the board. I'm a Notion ambassador, so I'm really lucky to test out new Notion AI features, some of which haven't been released yet. I'm really excited for them to get out there because I think Notion just keeps hitting it out of the park, if you ask me. But they continuously break. So like, and the product people know that. They're always asking the ambassadors, like, okay, like either like type in the feedback in the Notion app or like just tell us what is going wrong because like we know things will go wrong. And I can't say where we're going to be in like a year from now or 5 years from now, but I kind of like that we're in this period where at least we have companies like Notion, like others, that have that human AI partnership where it's not like I think sometimes these AI companies get a bad rep, sometimes deservedly so, but as if they're just like evangelists or evangelical and just want to promote AI. But no, like we have very smart people working on this and they're very aware of AI flaws. And if you're a company like Notion, like they're smart enough to empower a group of Notion users to like help them out even more so. So I think going to like the different perspective, I'm curious, Hillary, how did you decide to end the piece like that? And then also want to get your take on if you could say more like what a different perspective really means as AI continues to develop. But Hillary, why close it out like this?
Yeah. Um, I think the way that I see it is like me just practicing what I'm preaching. Because the whole idea is like, believe in yourself, right? Like you too can change the world, right? And I think that bit at the end there was me trying to like put that out there, like trying to put out like it's scary, like it's hard for me to like speak myself into this space. Like it feels very scary because like in terms of like how I like view my relationship with AI, it's very much non-technical as I've already like you've alluded to and also I mentioned in the piece. It's more like experiential, right? But at the same time, it's like I do think I have a different perspective. Like I do think that I can actually bring something into the conversation and change the conversation in that way. So that's kind of how I viewed that ending.
And then Austin, just speak a bit more because I think you spoke on like that different perspective idea and how that changes with AI. Like curious, like what does that mean, especially for like young professionals as we kind of like grow up with AI tools continuing to develop much faster than us.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you read my mind exactly what I wanted to talk about. And to kind of answer that question in a roundabout way, I want to talk about what really stuck out to me the most in this piece was this line where Hillary writes, maybe some of us entry level people even think that AI should replace us. And the reason why it stuck out to me so much was because this is something I have thought before. You know, working at my job, I'm like, I can't be replaced so easily. And a lot of the times, you know, entry level work is, you know, maybe this is something going back to capitalism, as Hillary loves to point out, that, you know, entry level work is almost derided to a point. It's valued less as it's entry level. You know, it's given to people who haven't earned their chops. It's basically synonymous with doing busy work, with doing work that is you know, replaceable by any person in a way. And, you know, when you're going through it, I think a lot of people would say, why not replace that? You know, why not get rid of answering, you know, 100 emails a day when AI can do it immediately? And I think my response to that isn't to say, you know, I think there's some ways you can say, well, like, oh, just, you know, believe that you're more important, but that doesn't change the fact that jobs are being replaced. And I think it's almost disingenuous to a point, um, to go about that angle. But I think what the article really challenges people to believe is, or to really call for, is that this is a moment of potential redefinition. You know, people are saying and talking, and I even write about it, that there's threats of the entire white collar industry, at the most, if not all entry level jobs could be done away with. But I think instead we have to think about this as a potential point where we can really redefine what entry level means. And almost get back to this root of thinking about entry level not as synonymous with busy work, not as synonymous with, something that no one else wants to do, that anyone can do, that takes no skill, but as synonymous as someone who just entered, someone who has a new perspective, who can really learn about an industry, but also provide input into an industry as this very entry level, very low stakes role. So really, I think we should look at AI not as, I think there's a lot of doom and gloom about it, of taking away entry level jobs. And it has that very real threat. But I think this piece, in one way calls for people to look beyond AI as this exploitative tool, or as this tool to be exploited to make life easier, and really think about it as a tool that can really reimagine our world. Think about an entry level
Yeah.
job where you're not working the spreadsheet 24/7. Instead, you're shadowing someone, or you're really thinking about these issues, or, doing the analysis yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Before we do a fun lightning round, Hillary, Austin, do you guys have any questions for me? I know Hillary had asked me before if this was a back and forth situation, so I just want to make sure I give
Mm,
that opportunity before we wrap up with a lightning round of questions.
yeah, I guess when when you think about the relevance of this piece, because this is within the context of young professionals, right?
Yeah.
Do you think of it in terms of principally what you're doing sort of in your day-to-day work and your like explicit sort of defined career path? And to what extent do you see this as also applicable to work that you do outside of that path? Uh, Keeping in mind that you yourself sort of pursue multiple lines of work simultaneously.
Yeah, I tell my friends that if I could never think about AI again, I would immediately. It's not a core passion of mine. I think I like to create, and if AI helps with that, great. But I think that the reason why I follow it so closely, and I think it affects both like the path I'm on and whatever I want to do elsewhere, is because of my job search. And both of you have heard enough of this. Anybody who's like listened to the podcast, like my dozens of followers have heard this too, where like, I mean, you can chop it whatever way you want. Like Dario can say whatever he wants. Axios can say whatever they want. Like I think there's a line from the Axios co-founder Jim Van Hyde that I really like. He's like, don't tell Americans something that's different from what they see with their two eyes. Like when you go through the process and you see how hard it is to get a job, like sure, there are other non-factors, but I think a lot of it is because places just aren't hiring. And why aren't they hiring? Like a big reason for that is because of what Austin said. Like a lot of places are just thinking about the bottom line of how to make their workflows more efficient, not how to make their entry level people more efficient. Like unless you have had a multi-summer internship. I'm exaggerating, of course. We love our multi-summer internship friends who have full-time jobs now. Like, it is very hard to break into fields at Georgetown. Students specifically are very accustomed to breaking into like consulting, finance, a growing number in tech, I would say, I would hope, because I was part of this effort. It's really hard. And the fact that I'm a podcast producer at a free speech organization, that is a big combination of luck and determination that I wouldn't wish that path on anybody. Like it was really hard to get something like this that allows me to do what I love. But I think it just kind of encompasses, like I think YouTube can change the world. It's first like, okay, how do I get there? But then like, what does that even mean for me with AI? Like, I think it's almost a two-part thing. So yeah, it just goes back to the job search. I'm never going to forget it. It's made me very scared, which isn't a bad thing. I'm like very on guard about like how to maintain my professional status. And it's for better for worse, I think has changed me. And I think AI is like inextricably linked to that. So we're in it for the long haul, it seems like, whatever that means. So yeah, that's what I would say. Austin, any last questions before we do the round?
Yeah, well, just first to note that, I'm there, an ally with you through that struggle. I also
Thanks,
went
man.
through it. It was also very rough.
Yeah.
But now speaking to your millions of followers and fans, you can say you've made it. Um, I think my question is really when you first read the piece, what was your immediate reaction? And maybe if there is any way, how has this made you go about either using AI or your day to day, or, has there been one instance you've thought about it when using it? How has it changed you and how are you now too changing the world?
Yeah, I think my first thought was I disagree with a lot of it, but Hillary probably already knows that. I mean, the first thing is like the reliance on the New York Times, which we all know is like going down the drain in terms of the quality, but I'm not going to say too many times that everyone should just read the free press and think for themselves, but it is on my head and I do believe in that. But more, with more depth, I would say that I think the last section to me, it really stood out because I think that's the most agreeable. Like any path of life a young professional is on right now, I think something that we can all agree on is we should have our own perspectives on how to go about things. And if AI is replacing that, then yeah, there is an argument for why we're not necessarily better than AI, but why we're different. And I think that's what people are going to really want to hone in on for my work, I think that like I mentioned, I've been doing more and more Notion AI stuff, especially the beta features. I think it's actually led me to engage more because I mean, Notion is a tool that I do know really well at this point, and I think I think the reason why what I consider to be like the best AI thinkers of this day and age are older is because they have the experience. Like it's not like we don't have young people like us. I think we're all doing great things, but I think there's a reason why, at least for me, the ones who resonate are the ones who have years of experience in like research or even like media. Like they don't have to be like the academics, but they have to be like the business leaders. And like it or not, like Elon Musk, like he has had a lot of success in pushing forth disruption and innovation. Again, personal feelings aside. So I think that's how I feel about like the sources I'm still drawn to. And like I think what I'm getting at is how it's impacted me. It's like I still have inspirations I look up to that like have those years of experience. That is something that I don't think has changed. Even as AI changes faster and like younger thought leaders come out, it still just doesn't hit to me because I'm like, you haven't lived enough, including us. Like I think it's important for all of us to keep like thinking at this speed and putting things out. And it's great that we don't need to be on CNN or Fox to like set up this live stream and again talk to our couple of audience members. But it's not that I'm advocating against that. It's just like we don't have enough experience yet. But I think even us doing this right now and something that I try to do regularly, like we're gonna get there faster. Like that's what matters because I do think for all I just said about me being able to look at people like 10 years older than me, 15 years older than me, like, guys, we're going to be like mid 20s soon. Like, we're going to start, like,
Stop.
there's a reason why I know, I won't speak too much on it, but there's a reason why it's like Forbes 30 under 30. It's kind of like, there's like certain benchmarks where you're like, oh, like, by this age, I should do something. And of course, we're not beholden to that, but we're in and continue to be in the prime of our lives for at least a bit of time. And I do think, at least for me as somebody who down the line wants to add more members, like I do feel a sense of urgency where I'm like, I want to do a lot with what I have now, with all the privilege I have now. And then later on, I can choose. I can choose to engage this. I always want to talk to you guys like in this casual format, no matter how big or small it is. But like, I think later on with all the other work I do with podcasting and writing and the Notion stuff, like I can choose that's where I'm working towards. Okay. Well, hopefully there'll be a part two of this article or, we'll talk again. But just to wrap things up, I'm gonna do a previously unannounced lightning round. I'm just gonna base it off of Hillary's articles. So these are just like either ors and just try to answer with one sentence. You could provide a little bit of explanation, but just, keep it succinct as possible. Okay. First, do you learn more in high school or college? Hillary and then Austin.
I learned more in college.
Okay.
I
Do you
learned
want
more
to say a
frameworks
little
in
bit?
college.
Okay. Okay. Awesome.
I definitely learned a lot more in college just because I think of the breadth of people, breadth of experiences.
Yeah, I agree. And adding on to that, the travel as well. If you choose, you can do a lot more with it. Is it worse to pull an all-nighter in Georgetown Lounge or library or in your own room? Hillary than Austin.
Ooh, I've never done the former.
Oh, really?
I think the
Wow.
former would be worse. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You don't want to be around people while you suffer?
It's just like I've been in Laos seeing people sort of pull all-nighters, and I think I would just, thinking about that experience, I wouldn't wanna be on the other side of that. No offense.
Mm.
Okay, that's a little judgmental. Um, well, I've never done either, but I'd honestly probably say I was leaning towards Lao, but I think I'd have to say home because I'm a very inwardly lazy person, and I think the thought of having to walk home at the end would hang over me the entire time.
Sure, sure. I've also done neither, but I would actually do Lao so I could at least like be in the company of other struggling people and maybe, I don't know, make a new friend. But I don't know. We would have to play that out in real time, which hopefully will never happen. Uh, I had another one in mind that is slipping away. What is a worse time to talk to a professor? At the end of their office hours where they clearly want to leave, or right after a class session that they clearly want to leave? Hillary, then Austin.
Mm, I think at the end of office hours, 'cause I think professors I would argue professors should expect students to sort of have thoughts and feelings and reflections after class, whereas after office hours, that's a less defined time to start with. So I think there are rightfully more boundaries around that.
So, Austin?
I would definitely prefer to do it in office hours. I feel like there's been way too many times I've stood, that awkward distance away from the professor as, there's maybe like one person ahead of you, but then they have a 10-minute conversation as you're waiting just to ask one quick question. So yeah,
Yes,
office hours.
I agree. And that can happen in office hours too, but I think less so. So, yes,
Mhm.
I would side on that. And then last one, what's worse? You being distracted on your computer the whole time, either in class or at work, or not being able to look away from somebody next to you who is consistently distracted in class or at work. What do you feel like is a worse feeling, Hillary than Austin?
Um, I think being just like you yourself being distracted because at least if you're looking at other people's stuff, you're engaged with your environment. Whereas if you're looking
That's
at
so
your own
positive.
computer, you're just like insular. So
Sure.
yeah.
Okay. Thoughtful. Austin.
Well, as Hilly would know, I am a very bad eavesdropper. I'm horrible. If I'm sitting at a cafe and there's anything going on around me, I'm either looking at it, listening to it, and I love doing it. So
Yeah.
I would just say that based on the fact that it's so high up there for me.
Yeah. Austin doesn't respect people's privacy. Let that be known.
Not at all.
I think it's worse to be distracted by others actually, because I usually like when I be distracted by like I'm usually seeking it out. Like I'm out of school now, but yeah, there are definitely sessions where I'm just gonna read my book on like tech, then I'm just not gonna like I'll just watch the slides while, the much better student Hillary is next to me. I'm like, I'll just ask her if I need anything. So thank you, Hillary, for that. But yeah, because I like my distractions because I feel like they're usually intellectual ones. So I'm able to like just, you know, kind of go on my own path. And maybe that's also like a very positive spin on that. Well, Hillary, Austin, thank you so much for coming on Mindful Notions. The piece is called You Too Can Change the World. It will be the first link of the show description. And this is a Notion productivity focused podcast helping young professionals do more with less. We're working out the branding. It's been over a year now doing it, so I should figure that out a bit more. But if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube, please, please, please give us a like, rating, or review. It really helps new listeners find the show. And if you're on Substack, consider recommending Mindful Notions. I will be posting more frequently. nothing more specific than that, so I can hold myself to that. But this is the Substack that I want to be engaging more, especially the later half of the year. So any support is much welcome. Thank you to everybody who joined the live stream. Thanks again, Hillary and Austin, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.